Good to see all these friendly faces and lovely smiles. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Andy Bailey. I'm with AT&T's Corporate Social Responsibility team, and I lead our humanitarian disaster response programs. I also have the pleasure of being a CIVIC board member. So again, thank you for joining us. And I'm happy to engage someone who I've had the chance to work with and learn from for, I don't know, many years. And, just to listen and learn about the Boulder County fires and the relief response and long-term recovery outlook. It's a devastating situation, we all know, but I'm inspired by everybody's interest in joining us today to learn how you can connect your organizations to support and lift up these impacted communities. A quick little housekeeping notes before I introduce Ian. This is being recorded, and all resources mentioned will be shared by the CIVIC team in a follow-up email. We'll start with updates, some common questions we received, and then open it up for Q&A. If you have questions, please put them in the chat, and feel free to record or post any of your reflections or any resources that you'd like to add throughout the chat. We'll be monitoring and queue up those questions as we go. Also, there's live captions, and so when prompted, you can choose to have the captions displayed. And then if you have any technical issues, please reach out to Jess Welser. She's our BCIF staff member, and she's waving in the corner. So with that aside, let's get to the meat of this and let's get started. So now I'd like to welcome Ian Anderson. Ian's the chair for Colorado Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, affectionately known as VOAD or COVOAD. It's a forum where NGOs share knowledge and resources throughout the disaster cycle. During, in Ian's full-time role, when he's not busy leading COVOAD, he's the director of emergency services for the Salvation Army. He covers a lot of dirt. So he's got Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, and Montana. He's got 12 years of international and domestic emergency management experience, and is a subject matter expert in collaborating with sector partners to maintain vital relationships and plans. So Ian, we've got lots of questions. We've got a lot of interest in this space. People are wanting to know how they can lead their organizations, their employees in support of these impacted communities. So can you give us just a kind of a share of the current state of what this looks like, where we're at currently with relief, recovery, and response?
Yeah, it's good to see you all. Thank you for calling in. I appreciate this opportunity. Yeah, so Andy and I have been working together for years. And I will say that's kind of where we have a relationship now to where we can really partner effectively together. So I think that's kind of what I'm going to harp the most to you all. I wish this is unfortunately, we're already down to 26 minutes, and I wish I could learn about what each of your organizations do and strategize ways to figure out how to bring you to the table, right? So for this event, I would imagine you've all seen the news. The fire was devastating, most devastating wildfire in Colorado history. The response has been going, I say this carefully, the response has been going incredibly well in the context of how disaster response normally unfolds, right? So I say that with a grain of salt. People are hurting, devastated, but there's so many resources in place to provide these folk with assistance. So I'm going to give you some stats now. I'm going to bore you really quickly with stats. A total of 1,935 homeowners have filed for assistance with FEMA. and a total of 796 renters have applied for assistance with FEMA. So when a disaster happens, the first thing we are trying to figure out are kind of all of the demographics of the folk that have been impacted, right? Because we want to figure out how we can best serve folk. Me wearing my VOAD hat, really, my priority is really 6 months to a year from now, when we're finding out about families and individuals who didn't get the help for all sorts of reasons. So trying to make sure all those giant safety nets are in place for those individuals. So yes, we are, I want to be careful I say this, we're kind of getting out of the heroic phase of this disaster. People are getting tired, but at the same time, survivors, it's starting to become more and more real about the situation that they're finding themselves in. So it's a big moving target. And there are all sorts of complexities still coming up, and complexities that we've had to navigate already. That's a very general, broad update on the situation at hand.
Right.
But yeah.
You kind of hinted at it, but there's a life cycle to disasters, Ian. So you mentioned kind of we're in the immediate phases of this. When you think about the next phase, and then the next phase, and then the next phase, because this is a long road. Talk to us about, share, from your experience and what you're seeing or hearing. What does that look like? What are some of the milestones that you're expecting with this recovery or with this disaster?
Sure.
That we can pay attention to.
So, right now we're kind of getting into, I don't want to get too much into emergency management jargon on this call. But right now, emergency management at the county and the towns, the 3 towns, and when I say the 3 towns, I mean Superior, Louisville, and the unincorporated parts of Boulder that were impacted. They're all trying to get their arms around all of this. It's crazy to get your arms around recovering an entire community in the span of 2 to 3 weeks. You just have to be realistic about how complicated this is. So right now, where we're at is, I want to say some very specific clean debris removal and cleanup has started. But again, there are so many barriers with that because of the dangers, all of the health concerns with that. So for those situations, it's going to be highly trained volunteers, highly trained organizations who provide those very specific services. So we're kind of getting into that, and rebuild. Kind of the debris removal, all of that stuff is incredibly challenging too, because you'll have homeowners who, they want to get onto that property and sift through all that stuff and try to find their grandmother's ring. While on the flip side, you have county decision makers who are making very difficult decisions to come in there and start to clear that out, because they don't want the environment to get polluted. There's all sorts of very rational reasons. So it is a crazy push and pull over the next few weeks and months as far as kind of debris removal goes. As far as the recovery processes go, there's VOAD, which is kind of our state VOAD network. There is a national VOAD, and we are fortunate to have a Boulder County VOAD. And there are not county VOADs all over the state. We have about 5 to 10 of them, and they kind of all flex. Sadly, Boulder County VOAD exists because they've had disasters. So they've had a reason to have that kind of network in place. So Boulder County VOAD is working with nonprofit partners, the local community foundation, to come together with a long-term recovery group. And that is where you'll have kind of organizations over the next month to probably 2 to 3 years meet on a regular basis to coordinate assistance. One other thing that's being worked on right now is a program called Disaster Case Management. And that is where a nonprofit will be assigned cases for survivors. And then they will literally work with that one family for as long as it takes to recover, right? Or find a new normal. And that could be as long as years. So that's kind of another process that's being set up right now.
So Ian, really, just to even go on a finer point, many people on this call are hearing from their leaders, their
Yep.
clients, and fellow employees.
Yep.
I want to volunteer. Let's go. How can we help? Why aren't we able to get out there yet? I mean, it's been 3 weeks or 4, when are we going to get out there? What kind of guidance can you offer the audience here on how to answer those questions? And then when you mentioned VOAD and some organizations that are involved, if you can maybe mention a couple that, they can kind of check in on or look at to possible, as possible volunteer.
Yeah.
Partner.
So I'll say, sadly, because of the way disasters have gotten more and more frequent in recent years, and sadly with terrorist events and shooting events, emergency management has continued to ramp up their planning on who can do what. We're no longer in the days where just all sorts of randoms just show up and feed meals. There are specific processes for every aspect of disaster response. So I'll say, even me with my logo here, the Salvation Army, there have been disasters at times where we have not been accepted on the job site because they already had another organization lined up to provide that specific service, right? So I just want to put it out there to you guys. Everything that Andy was just saying about you guys having many folk in your ears about wanting to provide assistance, man, it is so challenging. Part of the VOAD responsibility, kind of what we do is even within our own organizations, is help deconflict competition, right? Because that is just a thing that happens at times. For this situation, as it happens every single time, we have a lot of local nonprofits in Boulder that are frustrated that some organizations that they think don't have a local presence have roles, and the other way around. So there's a lot of peacekeeping and managing expectations that goes along with this. As far as volunteer opportunities go, so we have a great platform. And again, this is just one of many ways to access. And it's called Colorado Responds. It's coloradoresponds.org. And we created that system. It's managed by a VOAD organization called Spark the Change. And they have a whole infrastructure where volunteers, and it's generally for spontaneous volunteers, right? So when a big disaster happens and you see it on the news and you want to help, you go to coloradoresponds.org and you register with them to say, hey, I want to help. You can give some information initially. And then what we do is we then send out newsletters. So right now, because of what's happening with the big donation center that's happening at the Flatirons Mall, we're sending out emails once a day asking for volunteers for that. If your organizations want to volunteer, that's kind of like the easiest opportunity that I can kind of share right now. And the best reason and a great opportunity, a reason why that's a great opportunity is also because it's kind of the safest. It's also requires the least amount of training as far as things go. So it is good for kind of spontaneous groups. Now, what you can do is if you have a group that wants to go out and provide support to that, that's totally something that we can accommodate and line up kind of a group to do a day of service. So that's kind of like the easiest plug for managing volunteers who aren't already affiliated with a nonprofit partner. And that's what kind of Andy's second question there was, list some of our nonprofit partners who already have a role. I say this all the time. I scream this from the rooftops. It's at the time of a disaster is not the time to create the relationship. And that stinks, right? Because that's when, of course, many of us, all of us, have those heartstrings tugged to support. So I would encourage you to go to our website. I can totally show you a list of organizations. I mean, there are the bigger token organizations like the Salvation Army, the American Red Cross, Team Rubicon, Southern Baptists. I mean, there's many organizations that have statewide capacity in Colorado. And then there's local nonprofits as well. The other issue that we have at times with affiliating volunteers that I'll share with you guys is I don't want disasters to happen. I'm the disaster director. I prefer that they not happen. And so one of our challenges, we have a lot of training that we have to do, right? Because we background check all of our volunteers. When you affiliate with one of us, right? There's training to do whatever specific services each of our organizations do. And then the problem is sometimes you have to go through all these hurdles and do a ton of training, and then there isn't really a promise. It's not like a disaster is going to conveniently happen next week. And they always happen on a Friday. Or, in this last event, the day before New Year's Eve, they're never convenient. It's challenging, right? So, but I would say, Andy, he's kind of the perfect case study as far as how we have developed a relationship for years. And I don't know how much. I'm sure Andy will touch on this some point later, but find out what you guys do well and find out which organizations fit with your mission. Because I'll say Andy has done that. He has a couple of organizations that they have really evaluated over years and have said like, this totally makes sense for us to partner with them in this capacity, and it makes for us to partner with this group in this capacity. So I would totally encourage that.
And it's funny, unfortunately, disasters are bullies. They really don't respect time. They don't respect calendars and holidays and those types of things. Ian, so I see a number of different in the chat. ColoradoResponse.org, again, Spark the Change. That's where a good place to find. You mentioned the Donations and Resource Center. To me, that seems like that's right now, that's the kind of the center or the most where the most opportunity for larger groups or just in the individuals to volunteer. I can speak. I know I have a couple people who I know who have already volunteered there and had a great experience and thought that was positive. It also sounds like patience is also important because, again, the recovery phase is going to, long after the cameras are gone, other disasters have happened probably. Recovery will still be happening and support will be needed. One other thing that I also wanted to mention before we move into some of these other questions and open it up, you mentioned about skill sets. And so I think about, I ask the audience to kind of think about what your company does and what some of the skills that you have. Maybe it's logistics, maybe it's warehousing, maybe it's, some sort of IT management or something like that. Who knows? Or just sweat equity, right? But just kind of think about some of the, the skills and some of the, things that your company does well. And then talk to your existing partners here in this community, and more than likely they're activating. Maybe not, it's not getting necessarily the publicity, but they're activating and they're working in response in one way or another. And just ask and have those conversations with those partners that you already have relationships with, how they're responding, what their needs are. And then I guess on the other side is sometimes so much spotlight is focused on this event that other needs go unmet. And so, there'll probably be some opportunities, maybe not directly related to the Boulder response, but just opportunities in the community at large. Jess, any questions that we're missing here, or do we open it up for Q&A? What's the next step? What would you like?
Great question. So we do have two in the chat that are kind of similar. So one is just asking about if a nonprofit can sign up to support those individual families. And the second is what organizations are helping families that don't have GoFundMe's, a local network, something like that.
Yeah, so I will say all of that is still being ironed out. It's one of these things that happens with the kind of like the natural free fall of disasters, right? We are continuing to hear about local nonprofits that have stood up and done these amazing things and they did it in their lane, in their bubble. They didn't think to check in with, the guy from the Salvation Army or other folk to say that they were doing this stuff because they very much felt like it was in their lane. So there are organizations that are providing assistance, and I will, as you shared, Jess, of sharing out resources, I will. Colorado 211 is quickly becoming one of the main resources for putting together a resource guide directly related to offers and support for this event. And that's not necessarily for kind of donation offers. It's for, if you need a ride to this location to access this resource, you call this organization. So I'm sure I missed part of that answer. What else did I not touch on? I would say there's also kind of, I don't want to confuse things here, but also getting our arms around the sequence of delivery of recovery support. So one issue that we learned about pretty quickly was there were some great well-intended organizations in the county who started providing rent assistance right away. And that sounds great, right? But of course, we then learn, or we then start to get our arms around it, and we find out that there's been a FEMA declaration for this event, right? A federal declaration. So there's rent assistance that can be provided by FEMA. However, if a survivor has received rental assistance from a nonprofit, it disqualifies them from FEMA assistance for that. So, I mean, like, that's like an example of like something that was totally well-intentioned at the beginning and probably helped someone for a few days, but now they've potentially lost out on bigger support, right? So that's another thing that we're kind of like getting our arms around. There's a local nonprofit who's doing a lot of kind of the local casework, case management. They're called Sister Carmen. They've been doing an incredible job. And so they will definitely kind of be one of those lead organizations as we come out of this. Because again, all disasters, this is another preachy moment, or another, I have many soapboxes to stand on. But like all disasters start and they end local. So all of these big systems that we're setting up here, we're at the same time already thinking about what local nonprofit can take that process back when it shrinks back to that scale. Or when the cameras leave in a few weeks and months. So that's kind of another thing. What else? I want to make sure that I'm answering your questions. Yep, Sister, I see right there. I believe Sister Carmen and a Precious Child may be doing direct support, financial assistance. Yes, a Precious Child is one of the partners who is leading the Donations and Resource Center. So that is that.
Ian, I know that, donations are both in kind and financial. There's abundance of resources, thankfully, here. It's kind of a unicorn event or disaster versus some of the other places. There's a lot of resources here to mobilize and deliver impact. Any guidance or from your experience when you think about balancing, donor and community expectations, how a company should think about, not just now, right? Everybody's just rushed, but maybe in the long term around, how maybe mobilizing fundraising and those type of efforts in the future.
Sure. So One thing that we try to do, I'm pretty sure on our Colorado Responds website, is list the organizations that are actively responding to that specific event, right? So we don't just always have the Red Cross and the Salvation Army and all of the tokens at the top of the list. We really try to do it based on who's responding to each event. I would also, I would encourage you to donate to organizations that are transparent with their funding or with the ways they're gonna to spend that money. Donating financially is always best because it allows us to be the most flexible with our assistance that we can provide, right? Because here's the thing, I have no idea what the actual unmet needs will be that we're going to need to apply funds to in 6 months from now or a year. So I need to be clear about that with our donors and partners and stuff because we need it. But I can't tell you clearly what it's going to be spent on today, if that makes sense. And that's incredibly challenging. Also, I think there is a balance of, I love Andy, how he always says sweat equity. I know no one likes to hear, or not, people don't often like to hear the money is best, but it really is helpful in many cases. Another thing that I'll add is very often a fiscal agent is kind of determined. So that is one thing that will come down the pipeline in the next few weeks, I would like to imagine, as the long-term recovery group comes together and they start collecting funds as a long-term recovery group. They will identify a fiscal agent for those funds. I think right now, kind of the biggest organization that's been providing the most financial assistance has been the Boulder Community Foundation.
Yeah.
And they've been doing great stuff. I certainly have no problem preaching their name. I don't know. Again, I always have to say I'm just the guy from the Salvation Army. I don't know if they will be the fiscal agent for this event for kind of the long-term recovery process. I wouldn't be surprised if they throw their names in the hat for that role. And that's that's a difficult situation that we're in for a lot of these roles, right? Disaster case management, who's gonna get that contract for that service, right? Because that's years of jobs and processes, right? Yes.
It's complex.
It is super
I see
complex.
a couple more really quick. I see some questions around material or in kind, specific around laptops like technology, and then also just someone mentioned, they're seeing that the material or in kind donations are ending on 1/24. And can you offer any reason why that is and why that time? I think I know, but I don't want to take that away from you. In-kind donations, the disaster after the disaster.
Yeah, so if you come to the donation center, you can figure out how to sneak on the escalator to go up to the second floor. You will see the gaylords of donations that they still have yet to even sort. So that's, we have gotten so much assistance with this, which is great, right? I think what they're doing is on the 24th, they're going to stop accepting unsolicited material donations. So they will still accept donations from organizations like you guys, from COVOAD organizations who have corporate partnerships for stuff that they need specifically. But what they're going to stop on the 24th is just like, I show up in my minivan and I just kind of unload some of my stuff. I think that's kind of what they're getting away from. I wouldn't be surprised if a month from now they ask to turn it back on, but that's just kind of where they are today in the process. As far as the question for laptops, I don't know if anyone has specifically gone for that. I know if you go to the Donations and Resource Center, there is kind of a section for electronics, but it's probably not as focused as that. What I would encourage you all to do is email us at coloradovoad@gmail.com and BOCO-VOAD, which is Boulder County VOAD @gmail.com with ideas like that and offers. I I kind of just want to throw those email addresses out as far as they can go to say, like, if you guys have thoughts or questions, literally anything, please send it to us. And we have a few folk who are monitoring that and really considering all of those. Andy is the perfect example. He reached out right at the beginning of this about mobile charging stations for AT&T. And I copied in the world of emergency managers to say, these are all the people that need to be aware of that offer, right? And have to kind of have a part in considering that offer. So yes, I know that.
That's perfect guidance. I think
Okay, cool.
reaching out and saying, hey, I have these specific assets, or I what about this? I think I always say the answer is always no if you don't ask. So I think I hope that that's what this, hopefully the audience here, you've got, a couple ideas, coloradoresponse.org, the VOADs to reach out to in the emails. Jess will send us all this information afterwards. Hopefully you have, and maybe some talking points that you can take to your leadership and your employees around, what's happening behind the scenes, with this disaster. This is a kind of a unicorn event, unfortunately, where you've got some health concerns where people aren't able to just go out and start mucking and gutting and doing things like that. So, this is a little different. And I think patience and communication is going to be helpful in finding solutions or opportunities for your employees and in your company and those who want to get involved. Jess, before we wrap, any other, I know we're over, but any other things that we're missing? Okay. Ian,
I just have two resources to share real quick. So around the country, a lot of the state emergency management offices are creating these things called business emergency operation centers. And really that's kind of a dedicated person to corporate partners who want to better connect with state emergency management. We do have one here in Colorado. So I will make sure that I share that info out through Jess. Also, there's another network called the Colorado Emergency Preparedness Partnership. And it's called CCEP, so Colorado that. And then it is basically a network. I'm looking, of course, at the stats right now, but it's 3,900 members. And they are legitimately well connected with kind of disasters. And I think it would definitely be a forum for you guys to plug into to be able to better connect in the future. And again, I would also encourage you guys to check in with the VOAD organizations as well. Just so it's the widest net that you guys can cast to then be able to check in. Awesome.
And I'll make a plug, CIVIC. We have a disaster toolkit that we put together. There's resources and some guidance there. And again, hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully this added some insight. Give feedback if you want to have another call like this in the future, maybe timing or a specific topic. Ian is, like I said, just a wealth of knowledge, a subject matter expert and connected and happy to answer your questions also directly, and same with me.
I'd be happy to have another meeting in a forum like this, but also for any of you, just send us an email and I'd be happy to connect with you guys.
Perfect. Jess, thank you for the time. Thank you for setting this up. Ian, appreciate it. Audience, thank you guys for joining us today, and we'll talk soon. Thank you all.